Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institutional Development Professional Committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you as we celebrate our speakers' leadership skills together. Each one of you knows what we have accomplished. We know what we envision for the future. In moving forward, each one of us individuals need to take on a role of leadership and seek a role model to emulate as we endeavor to achieve new goals. Today, we are pleased to present a speaker who knows the importance of leading and is willing to share his concept of leadership with us. Dr. Richard Dawe became the president of Ozarka College on July 1st, 2009. Previously, he served as Vice Chancellor of the Ventura County Community College District in Ventura, California, an institution that is comprised of 3 state colleges serving more than 36,000 students. He also served as Dean of Work Education at College of the Ozark in Branson, Missouri, and as Assistant Professor of Budget and Public Policy at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Dr. Dawe proudly served our country in the United States Navy as a naval aviator. During his Navy career, he flew 38 combat missions on tracks into Iraq during Operation Desert Storm and made over 700 carrier-arrested landings. He later served as a director of a $9.4 billion working capital fund for the Department of Defense and completed his Navy career as a captain. Dr. Dawe holds a PhD in public policy and administration from St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri, a master's degree in financial management from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Technology from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, Illinois, and an associate degree from Georgia Military College in Blytheville, Arkansas. Today, Dr. Dawe serves on several boards and committees statewide and is chairman of the Melbourne, Arkansas Airport Commission. Please join me in welcoming the president of Ozarka College, Dr. Richard Dawe.
Thank you, Karen. Test. Can you hear me? Am I live or Memorex? If there are any retired or former military in the crowd, that means I was a squid in the Navy. That's what they fondly called Navy people. So I appreciate it, Karen. Thank you, and thank the committee, the development committee, for everything you do. Can you just raise your hand if you're a member of that committee here? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I think it's very important, providing opportunities. Hopefully, far better than I'll present today to you. I believe Dr. Riddle presented to you, an outstanding presenter, and I hope and if anything I can do to help draw the committee, but the committee hasn't needed any help from me so far. You've done an outstanding job, and I think this is very important. So hopefully, I'll try to make it worth your while today. If I can. I appreciate faculty, staff, students, colleagues at Ozarka College. You know, it wasn't lost on me that presenting as a leader of the college, we all are a leader in some ways. We'll talk about that today. As a leader of the college, presenting on leadership to when quite often things you do in a leadership position, if you're pushing the organization, if you're being transformational and not transactional, and there's a place for both, then people can be critical of you. And, you have to have a little bit of a thick skin, and that just comes with it. And some choose not to go down that road, and that's fine. And others are driven to do that, to be more transformational and to become leaders. You can still have an outstanding career if you're a manager or a leader, or if you're a follower, but no, criticism does come with leadership, and I've known that since I was knee-high ensign in the Navy, a youngster in the Navy. By the way, I did go to Hendrix College for a while too. Didn't go get my education completely out of Arkansas, and but I think, being honest, I know this is probably being recorded. I think I got a couple of B's and a C, and as Miss Bonnie Wyatt told me later, a proud alumna of Hendrix College, I wasn't terrible as a freshman. But anyway, I opted to go off and join the Air Force and go to Blytheville, and then started my education there. And it was kind of a long journey for me as a non-traditional kind of person. I also thank you all very much for attending, and I'll try to. I don't know exactly how long this will take. We're already at about 5 after, so we'll work through it, and I can cut it a little shorter if we need to. I'm told we only have 3 hours today, right? Okay, good. Well, I thank you for that gracious awarding of time. First of all, I'd like to show you some of the things. I'm not tied to the mic. I'll try to remember that. Some of the things that I'd like to cover today. First, you have to establish context for what I'm going to present, and I'd like some discussion, at the right time, so we don't not to go the entire 3 hours, but I'd encourage that and questions in places. But you have to define leadership and really to distinguish leadership from management, because arguably, and I would argue that they're very different things. There is some boundary spanning in responsibilities and functions of good leaders and effective managers, but clearly defined, they're very different. Styles of leadership. That's one area where I can open myself up to good-spirited criticism. Not looking at anybody in particular today when I say that, but no, there are different styles of leadership, and I think as I'll speak to, I think we all are developed. Arguably, some are born with it, not me, but you develop your leadership styles based on your experiences, based on good mentors, and importantly, bad examples too. You can learn, as I'll mention later again, you can learn, I think, as much or more sometimes from poor leaders, from poor examples of leaders and managers, and I think we probably see some heads nodding. And again, hopefully it's not directed at me, but no, I have things that certainly I don't want to do that some of my leaders, some were effective, but things that I don't want to embrace as my style. So transformational, transactional. Molly's studying that in her class apparently a little bit, and others have too. And good leaders never lean on a podium, but I will, because we're friends here. And but transformational, transactional. I'll get into that a little bit because it's important to distinguish the two. And there's a place, as I'll argue, there's a place for both transactional leaders, sort of keeping things going, and for leaders and managers that are transformational. And it depends in part on the organization's life cycle, on the experiences, and we'll talk about a few examples. Hopefully at the end we'll find this kind of interesting about the journey that Ozarka College has been down in the last 10 years or so. Pretty interesting case study. If one was to write up a case study, it would be worthy of a Harvard Business School case study, I think. But that's a good history. It's one which we should be proud of. But there's some interesting bumps along the way, like there are in any high-performing organization. Organizational culture. Well, that's kind of a mushy subject, something I've studied for my dissertation. Dissertation was actually kind of a boring title, but it was interesting work. It's assessing and managing cultural incongruity in strategic alliances, mergers, and acquisitions. So what's that mean? It means basically the soft stuff of organizations that people don't pay enough due diligence to, don't pay enough attention to, which is at the time it was about an 85 to 86% reason for failures of mergers, alliances, strategic alliances, and acquisitions. So the soft stuff, the mushy stuff, organizational culture, is the part that usually gives any organizations combining. Say if we were ever to become a part of a system school, well, you have to look at the culture, not only the HR benefits and programs and program offerings and so forth. You have to look at the culture as just an example to see if there's a fit there, because quite often a fit is assumed and it can cause major problems. Communication, it's key, has to be two-way, has to be effective, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Leading change, and then leading and managing culture change. Jenny, you probably already goofed it up. Salvaged. All right. You didn't think I'd correct it, did you? It's pretty easy. Okay. If I can invoke this.
People need to understand what leadership is all about. Leadership is not managing an organization. Organizations are made up of people. Leadership is motivating people. Leadership is about people. So yes, you got to be competent. There's no question about the fact you have to have competence to be a leader. But you also have to have character. Good leaders are men of competence and character. And many times character is more important than the competence side of the house. So I tell people that the secret to modern leadership is 2 rules. Rule 13, when placed in command, take charge. The leader is the person who's willing to take the responsibility. Now, there's a lot of other people out there that are willing to do the job, but they don't want to get hung with the loss when it happens. So as a leader, you have to be willing to take the responsibility. You have to be willing to take charge. So Rule 13 says, when placed in command, take charge.
See if I get this right now. Okay. You recognize that individual? Kind of an old school, very effective leader, Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf. He was a very impressive, very outstanding leader in our military, and just an interesting person, I think, to gain a perspective from. So defining leadership, I suggest it has little to do with titles and positions, whether it's a president or whether it's someone who works in services in an organization, whether it's a number 2 or 3, a staff person in a department, whether it's a coworker. It doesn't necessarily have to do with title. I mean, just as you know, there are presidents, chancellors, governors, not talking about president folks, legislators, mayors, on and on and on and on, who are there because of their position, because they've been elected or they've been appointed, and they weren't necessarily what we call good leaders or effective leaders. All right? So it doesn't have to do a lot to do with titles or positions. I think it's important to mention. Again, leadership and management are not synonymous. Managers, a lot of definitions, but basically managers need to plan, measure, monitor, coordinate, solve, hire, and occasionally, unfortunately, fire folks, restructure. Some common leadership definitions. Leaders are those who empower others. One thing you'll hear too quite often, managers do the right things, leaders do things right. You pick up the nuance in that. I mean, leaders also have to do the right things because of the responsibilities. And effective managers, it gets a little confusing, a little fuzzy, but that's often used. You'll see it in your graduate school classes and undergraduate classes and any kind of management supervisor training. This is something we're thinking about. Bottom line is, I think, in leaders have the ability to influence others. And a leader is anyone who has willing followers. You know, you might have followers on the surface because of your position, whether you're elected or appointed by a board or so on and so forth, or elected by members of your class, appointed by members of your class, elected by Student Government Association, and so on and so forth. But just because you're appointed to a position doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have willing followers. So that's key. Remember, you can be an effective leader, an important leader. You don't have to be a vice president, a director, a supervisor, a college president, a governor, and so forth. But it can be in a church group. You all know that. You have colleagues and friends who are leaders of a prayer group, leaders of a book club, on and on and on. There are a lot of different examples. So we're not just talking about people that are elected or appointed to be a leader, but what I'd like you to consider is how you might choose to influence or develop your own leadership skills within the groups that you have influence, say, social as well as professional. So you can be a leader among your peers. Okay, different leadership styles. These are some that you commonly see. Charismatic leaders, positional servant leadership, authoritative, team building, collaborative, and facilitative. Examples of charismatic leaders. I don't particularly consider myself a charismatic leader, but Presidents Reagan, Kennedy, Clinton certainly were charismatic leaders. Right, Brad? Hitler, charismatic? Sure. Positive? No. Politics aside, those were all examples of very charismatic leaders. Positional leaders, we mentioned a few appointed, elected, and so forth. Servant leadership, those who lead by example, and I try to embody personally some servant leadership ethics and attitude and style, and I think many of you do as well. You know, asking people to do things that you do yourself, basically, and valuing people and valuing their ideas and concerns about things that you're asking them to do. Very productive leadership style. Authoritative, again, a lot of examples out there. Putin, Hitler, very autocratic, very directive. Maybe on occasion very effective. Okay, may have very negative results, horrible results, but typically they won't be. They're only short-lived. Authoritative, autocratic, Machiavellian leaders, typically, and you've experienced them, maybe on lesser scales than those mentioned, of course, thankfully, but typically they have very short results, and they wear people down, and they incite fear, and so on and so forth. So they don't last long, typically. Team building, things like IT companies, other creative organizations, collaborative and facilitative. You know, this is normally what we see in higher education. Good words, right? Collaborative, facilitative. So that's often what you see. But I'll say they're often transactional. Remember, there's a time and a place. We'll get into that a little bit because I think it's important enough to discuss or present. There's a time and a place for transactional leaders, and a time and a place and a point in the organization or the college's, in our context, life cycle. There's a time for a transactional leader and team, and there's a time for some transformation to advance and to achieve new things. I would argue that in times of performance funding in a state, that's probably a time for transformation, right? We can't accept the status quo. We need to be doing things and sometimes in new ways. That creates some anxiety in the organization. We have to be open to that, because those who don't transform, you know, their student services, their academic programs, so on and so forth, student loan default rate, and other things which we've done very successfully. Those who don't will run the risk of not being around in a few years. I mean, you can look around the state, and there. I don't want to make this completely about colleges, but that's your context here. You look around the state, and there are colleges who their enrollment are just dropping like rocks. Good people, colleagues of ours, friends. Sometimes it's context dependent, you know, their environment. To that point, there are many people looking at Ozarka College and saying, because of you all, saying, what, in a little rural area, small college, why aren't you doing the same thing with your enrollment and your graduation rates and completion rates and so on and so forth? There are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of hard work, a lot of team effort goes into that. Which style do you think is most common? Most common in higher education, again, I gave the hint to that. It's facilitative, collaborative. And we'll talk a little bit more shortly about organizational cultures and family culture compared to a team culture. You know, there's been some discussion last year or so about, you know, maybe we've lost certain aspects of the family culture. And there are reasons for that. I think it's probably true. That's a good observation. And we've transitioned to more of a team culture. And arguably there are good reasons for that too. But we'll discuss that, or I'll present it shortly. Consider what style you use. What style you'd like to use or like to develop. You know, for students who are just beginning their careers, I mean, you've probably been leaders in your high schools and you know, with peers quite often. leader among colleagues in faculty, in the faculty and in staff. So consider what style you think you've used, and then consider, hopefully I'll create just a little bit of a few thought-provoking ideas to consider. Well, maybe this other leadership style perhaps is not as bad as I thought it was, in my view, in my worldview. You know, I would argue there's a time and a place for many different styles. Finally, you're well advised to create your core leadership style, and most of you already have that. You've already got your style based on your values and your beliefs, and the way you were raised. That's why I go back to, I believe strongly, and I think most believe, that leaders aren't necessarily born. They're developed over time. So your social environment, your family environment, your church environment, and so on and so forth, and the places you've worked have developed your ideas about how you should lead and how you should be, how you want others to perceive you. I've already jumped ahead. I'm not a good manager of slides, so bear with me, Brad, and try not to laugh too much. All right? Wanda's not here, so I don't think so. I have to pick on my buddy. Transformational versus transactional. Again, this is kind of one of those foot stomper points I'd like to leave you with later to consider. Again, I believe I am a self-professed at least person trying to bring transformational change. And that's what I've always done. It's what I was trained to do in the military. Had some successes there. But there are some risks and rewards. I want to talk a little bit about the risk and rewards to being a transformer, or being transactional, right? Costs and benefits to consider. Different organizational cultures and situations may require different approaches, and also different phases, which will speak to when we talk about the case study of our case, the last 10 years or so. Different points in the life cycle, different events that happen to a college or any organization, to a civic club, to a church. You know, when you lose a longtime pastor or minister, things like that are sort of shock the system and creates changes. And maybe you need for somebody with a little different style to come in. And you have to think about, too, the need for change. Is an organization ready to be, quote, transformed? Not always. I would argue that, 6, 7 years ago, organization, those of you who were here then, I don't know. We've been through several periods where we needed change, and then where we weren't ready for change before my arrival. You know, I think with the greatest respect for those who, in my job, who preceded me, because they all did great things. Talking specifics, Mr. Rush had great vision in branching out to the other counties, and going to, as Ron would say, going to where our students are. Great vision. Small schools can do big things, and that's an example. Then, situations happen and things change and there's turnover. And President Johnson, Dusty, was more transactional, but it was appropriate. He had great wisdom in being more transactional right after that turnover. Then the college went through several interims in different positions, key positions. So that's unsettling. So they weren't ready for you who were here, I'd argue, academically, that you weren't ready for some of the changes that we've teamed together in the last few years to accomplish. It really wasn't time. So it depends on the life cycle, it depends on institutional events, it depends on previous leaders, it depends on key people placed throughout the organization at all levels. So it's not transformational is not always the best thing for an organization. Deal and Kennedy would say that, put most simply, and if you're interested in organizational culture, Dylan, Molly, and others, those are sort of seminal authors and scholars of organizational culture. And they would most simply put, it's the way we do things around here. And we can all relate to that. Organizational culture It's just our way we do things, the things that have been done and observed over the years that succeed, that work for people. So that's why we do things a certain way. That's what develops a culture. Cultures can either be sort of average. They can be very strong. They can be weak cultures. They can be very positive. They can be very negative. So study of culture is something very interesting, and it has a great impact on your ability to use certain styles in leadership. And I consider myself a student and practitioner to some degree of organizational change. So I think it's important. I think it's important to be put in the right place to be able to provide transformational leadership. And you can't be a transformational leader without highly skilled, motivated people who are willing to work with you. Because I'll speak to it a little bit. If they're not willing to work with you, you don't stand a chance of being effective as a transformational leader. Organizational culture is also very, very hard to change. You've got to have real impetus, real reason to change culture, because particularly if it's a strong culture, if it's been around and worked well for everybody for a long time, it can be very difficult. Because you have to shock a culture to change it in a very short period of time. Dale and Kennedy and others would say that culture takes somewhere between 7 and 8 years or longer to change. Well, nobody has, in our field at least, there's not time to wait that long to change. You know, enrollments are dropping off dramatically for some colleges. We're in performance budgeting, performance funding environment. With politics as they are nationwide, we have to be more reactive than that. We don't have time. Our culture, fortunately, is not. It's a very, very strong, positive culture. One, interestingly to me, when I arrived, very open to change. Strong cultures are very. I recognize it was a very strong, positive culture. When I was coming in as a student of culture, I thought, you know what? And the board and others were telling me, hey, there are things we want to achieve. So many people were wanting transformation, saw a need. Not everyone, but a lot of people saw a need for change. So knowing that the culture was very strong and positive, I thought, well, this is going to be pretty daunting. You know, how do you unfreeze an organization, implement change, and then refreeze it to what you want when the culture is that strong and either positive or negative? It's a very, very difficult thing to do. The bottom line of culture, though, is something you have to be cognizant of. You have to think about it. You have to understand what led, the history of what led to creating a certain type of culture. Communication, it's got to be effective, two-way and consistent, and that's one thing that I presented, I think, at the in-service. I want to be more effective in my ability to communicate with folks as witnesses, evidenced by encouraging staff, classified staff, to start a classified staff organization with representation on the President's Consultation Council. And so we've published minutes openly. Not all colleges do that, but I think it's very important to be open. And we have the PCC, the Consultation Council, that reviews all the board agendas and so forth. So all that is in an effort to be more open and more communicative. Everyone has to be represented, and of course, as you all know, you not only have to be an effective presenter and have the right mechanisms and processes in place, but you've got to be a good listener, and you've got to show people, you've got to pay attention and really listen to people and take action on the things that they're concerned about, or communicate why you've taken a different avenue. So you have to listen and respond. And if you're new into a job or new in this environment, people tend to, hope you don't, but people tend to bounce around a little bit for opportunities for advancement. And if you're going into a position, it's critical to know what the state, to understand. It takes some study, understand what the state of the culture is, what kind of culture is it, strong, weak, don't assume it's positive, what kind of turnover in key positions have they had, what are you being asked to do? If you're being asked to be a transformational manager or leader, you need to know clearly what your expectations are of whoever it is that's hiring you or can influence your position. For a president, chancellor, it's a board. For president, it's a board. For faculty, it's division chairs, VPA, provost kind of folks, and so on and so forth. So if you're being brought in to make some changes, you need to know if they're going to, and I've been in environments where I've been brought in to change and had support, and environments where I haven't had support. If you don't have the support, you're not going to be effective, of course. Let's talk for a while about leading change, because that really gets to the core of what I want to present today. What are the expectations for you in leading change? If you're being brought in as a change leader, you need to know what the expectations are. Quite often, you're excited for the position. You're excited to take a new job and opportunity, and most of us won't take the time to really get into what are the expectations. And is that within your skill set? Is that within your ability to do that? You're going to have the right support. Do you have the right staff that can support the kind of things that the boss or the bosses or those who you report to are asking you to do, to accomplish? Leading change, you have to assess the need for change, because if you're going to change an organization or a group of any kind, you're going to have unexpected outcomes. That's why most of us are transactional leaders, because it's less painful. There's less personal and professional risk involved if you're transactional. If you know you're only going to be there for a little while in that position, is it really worth? Is the reward that you're hoping for really worth the risk? If you know you're there for a couple of years and you're out, probably not. And given the fact that a lot of us in academia, the academy, do move around, hopefully not here at Ozarka. We don't as much, which is good. But I jumped around quite a bit after the Navy, frankly, to get to where I wanted to be, to come back home and be in the kind of position I wanted to be in. So you have to consider that carefully. Whenever you're implementing changes, you're going to have groups, sometimes key people that'll serve as what are called blockers to your initiative. Okay, so you have to consider who are the expected blockers in the transformation or the change intervention that you're trying to design. So you need to build a team around that if you're being strategic, and you need to be, particularly if it's a bigger change. Because people don't like change. There are a lot of folks here in our context at the college that a few trusted advisors a while back that I can recall that said, well, why do we need these changes? Why do we need to keep building? Why do we need another site? Right, that was a big one for those of you who are, and that was a tough one. That was probably that was a lot to take on for those of us who were working toward that early on for a new president, because that. There's risk. There's risk in that. Some faculty saw risk as, well, we're already being stretched pretty far. True. Staff, my goodness, look at TRIO, Pathways, Student Services, already pretty stressed. There was a lot of concern about that. So is the risk of serving those students, by the way, grew at 35% this year, Scott, up there? I guess the risk was worth the reward in that case, but you gamble. You make an educated guess, and that's what we do if we embrace the concept of being transformational and making things happen on a grander way. And that's what I argue, except for extreme cases where you're there to heal, to serve as a healer, and to be transactional, and to keep things going, and help people recover. Certain instances, colleges and other organizations are like that. Unless you know that's what you're being brought in or what you've been assigned to do, and I think we all need to be mindful of how we can be transformational and how we can affect changes that are positive for students, positive for our communities, positive for our churches and other groups. So, obviously, I have a bias toward that, and I think most of you do. You have to find supporters at every level, and you have to carefully, without being too paranoid, you have to think about the blockers, because they're out there. Guarantee you. And everyone encounters that. We'll keep that out of the Ozarka context, but it's true. You have blockers. People who want to avoid change, people who feel tired, good people who feel tired. Because guess what? If you're used to having things a certain way and consistent and predictable, and that's low risk. You don't risk much by being like that. And you can be very productive and be transactional, be very productive and graduate students. But to take risks, to achieve new heights, you have to embrace those risks. And finally, is that last one controversial at all for you? Take time to read it. You can't read it from I couldn't. You can probably read it from the back. You're all young. And short-term organizational pressure or anxiety, even a more controversial word, is often useful. Otherwise, the outcomes are often transactional or marginal even. What do I mean by that? What do researchers and practitioners mean by that? It's not just my idea. The example I'll use, just because I like to fly, if you think, and it relates to organization, not just in the military context, but you think you want a fighter pilot or a crew of an airliner or even a bus driver driving your kids or grandkids to be so relaxed and so used to the status quo that they're complacent. Maybe they even find the time to text, right? We've all heard those terrible stories. Bus drivers. No, you want a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of pressure. It's a softer word. Just enough pressure. Now, if you get too much, you drop off the face of the curve there, mixing metaphors. But if you get too much, it's a terrible thing. But you want just enough pressure, just enough change, just enough of being pushed to achieve new things, to serve new students, different areas, to advance our distance learning programs, something new, something kind of controversial outside of those who understand it. Okay, we're the leading, I know in 2 years in Arkansas, we're the leading providers of, congratulations, faculty, leading providers of distance education programs. Probably more than most of the 4 years too. Wow, powerful. Dr. Riddle and I get calls constantly about, how are you all doing that? Well, we aren't. He is. Has more of a role. Division chairs certainly are. Faculty are. So you have to push the limits to do things like that, to have a powerful impact. Do you have a question, Brad? Good point. And creativity, there's a risk in that too if you're working among peers or in small groups or an organization, because we all have fear, if we admit it or not, if we realize it or not. Evaluation apprehension is a clinical term, right? Group dynamics. So we all have a little bit of fear or anxiety, maybe not fear, some have fear, of being evaluated by our colleagues. It's like me and you today. I mean, nervous. Leading culture change. I want to leave enough time to talk a little bit more about my perceptions of the Ozarka journey, and that I was allowed to join here a short 4 and almost a half years ago, and because I think it's interesting. I think there's some interesting takeaway points in that, particularly for those of you who have lived and breathed it, and sometimes felt hurt by it. Sometimes, quite often, felt very proud about it, about that journey, and you deserve to feel that way. Here are some common errors in leading change that Cotter's, again, some of you know his work. That's a person that if you're interested in organizational change, doing a little reading in your free time, right, Ruby? Your free time. Cotter, Deal and Kennedy on culture. There's some great, Warren Bennis, there's some great authors that are worth pursuing. Common errors in leading change: failure to create a significantly enough powerful enough guiding coalition. You got to have your team, because guess what? Guarantee you're going to have the blockers out there who are happy with the status quo, happy with not doing new building, happy with not going to new sites, happy with not changing things, because again, there's a cost to it. There's a risk. So you got to build your coalition. And under communicating the vision is one of the greatest failures of change leaders. Under communicating. And I haven't done well enough in my position in communicating to everyone the changes that we're pushing for. Permitting obstacles or people to block, and failure also to recognize the importance of creating short-term wins. Capital campaign. Sue Ellen, Carol, campaign committee, others. Powerful results so far. We're about to communicate some of those results. We're on the verge of it. We have to get signed contracts first. but it's wowing us. It's coming along very, very strong for our students, for our Student Service Center, for the college. So that's something we're mindful of, is communicating the wins. We've had some pretty big wins recently, and it's just going to continue throughout the year. I mentioned it takes a long time to change the culture. You should really never. You would be ill-advised to try to change the culture of an organization unless you know it's broken in a powerful way, and you've been brought in specifically to affect those major changes. Because that's the hardest kind of thing to change. I changed the culture of a failing Navy jet squadron, and with a lot of help. But somebody's got to lead that change, and it's I wouldn't care to do that very often. It's a very hard thing to do. You have to justify with people, with stakeholders at all levels and all directorates, all divisions. You have to make them understand and then support the need, the urgency for change. Because if things aren't badly broken, you're going to have too many people pushing against that change, and you probably shouldn't be going down that road in the first place. You're going to have unintended outcomes of any major change initiative, so you've got to be somewhat agile, and you've got to do a lot of environmental scanning. Use that term. You got to have your feelers out and your awareness heightened. You've got to have a lot of help from people that are sensitive to certain areas. How are these people being, like classified staff? That's part of the reason for the classified staff organization, is so that we can further empower classified staff to know exactly what we're doing, why we're doing things, and have a voice at the PCC, and have a larger voice, a louder voice for the college. Because we're all equal partners in this. And we can't assume, I don't want admin council or anyone assuming that we understand how, in this case, how classified might be affected by certain things, how they might view things, how great some of the changes that we're trying to establish. How much risk do they or other groups perceive there is in those changes? That's a track, a road that a lot of leaders and change leaders get into trouble with, is they make assumptions that they understand from different perspectives. They understand how a change in issues is going to be perceived. Did it again. Okay. Yay. Okay. I've gone away from my notes a bit because I don't have the time I really need. Not 3 hours. Let me just do a quick review if you'll allow me. This is worth a slide, I think, from Warren Bennis. Again, he's a management and change leader type guru, and been around a long time. The most dangerous leadership myth is that leaders are born, he says, that there is a genetic factor to leadership. That's nonsense, he goes further to say. In fact, the opposite is true. Leaders are made rather than born. We're all, I think, not everyone, but it's not fair to say that, but I think most people are aspiring leaders. Again, whether it's in the college, whether it's among faculty, whether it's in the state with colleagues and colleague institutions, whether it's in our church, whether it's in our civic organizations. I think we all aspire to have, leader's not a bad word. I mean, it doesn't mean power in most cases. Hitler might not have agreed, but it doesn't necessarily mean, blind power. It shouldn't. It should mean the ability to influence, to achieve things for the good of the institution, for the good of all. And that's really the key in being an effective leader. And it's why it's worth considering some of the things that are critical to that. This is a technology test more than anything for me. God's watching. Okay, I thought that was good, a good way. I meant to have that last as kind of a tie-up technology again. I'd like to talk a little bit, just briefly, maybe 5 minutes worth of just recounting. Hopefully not bringing back things that were particularly challenging for people, but bringing up. I think it's worth just because that's where we work and that's what we, this college that I think we all share a great passion for in serving our students. All I can speak to is the time, knowing the history, trying to understand the history, and knowing my experience since I've been here. I knew about the transition, the leadership. I knew that there were, in academics and at the present level, and others, there had been some transitions that were significant. And I knew after studying the college and what the path that the college had been down, and after a visit, I knew that that the culture was very strong. We all shared a passion, much like at College of the Ozarks in my experience there. Common values and beliefs, similar to College of the Ozarks, which is very strong and very positive from my perspective, like Ozarka. So I knew that there were certain things that I was being chartered and tasked by the board of directors and expectations by our communities in some cases that needed transformation, that needed some change, that needed advances. Not that things were negative, things were not, but you'd had some experiences that were significant. And we needed to advance, and we needed to serve more students, needed to grow, needed some more buildings, and things of that nature. So I thought the fact that the administrative council, some of whom are here today, thank you, the administrative council really we had interim presidents, interim VPAs, leaders in that right, but the administrative council, and this filters throughout the organization, the administrative council had been placed in far more of a leadership role than many admin councils or president's councils, chancellor's councils typically are expected to fulfill. So I thought it'd be difficult. I thought it'd be a challenge to bring the council back to more of a collaborative. It's always been very collaborative, but they were the decision makers largely, and they did that with consultation with faculty and staff. So I thought it'd be really tough to sort of bring that back to where there was a president who reported directly to a board. But amazingly, and typically you would find that. Typically you'd find that there would be a pushback or a problem. We didn't experience that. I didn't experience that at the college. I think that's because the core mission, the values and beliefs that the majority of you share were so strong and it was so cohesive that the council and others, the faculty, staff were open to changes. I think you knew there were things to advance, things we could do in a more powerful way. So although my predecessor had been one to sort of help heal in some areas, not accept status quo, but just to keep things moving along as we needed to serve our students at the time. I mean, he served in a very powerful role in that way, and I admire his efforts, frankly, publicly, as I've said before. I admire the efforts of the previous two director and presidents. But they all served in different ways. Some were more transactional than others. Some were more transformational. But it allowed me, that experience allowed me to come in and help build the team. I try not to take credit for the bad things or things that we wish wouldn't happen, but not for the good things because one person doesn't cause those. But we've got such a powerful team in place in all areas. People that care, people that have great expertise. You have, it's a little off point, but it's important to say, given the opportunity, you all have become envy is a strong word. You've gotten great attention from other colleges throughout the state. You have your respective areas and how we're doing things that are beyond what the scope of some other colleges are doing. And that speaks to your leadership. It speaks to your managerial abilities as well. It speaks to your presence and vision in the classroom. But also speaks, in or out of the classroom, it speaks to your leadership. So you're all leaders in certain ways. That's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it's as a student of leadership and a practitioner in different areas, different industries, it's my experience and my observation that you all are powerful leaders. And that combined with a strong, cohesive culture is what is allowing a small rural school to do great things and to move beyond our expectations, what others expect of us. So I encourage you to consider I'm getting very close on time, so I'm cutting some things short. But I encourage you to consider the journey we've been down as a college, where we are now, why it's important to open your minds a bit if you're not there, and some of the transform. Why do we need to change? Why do we need to, a new building? Where's Jason or Tina? They and the admin council and others. They would say a new building, a new student services center, a new master plan for Ashland, a master plan this year for Mountain View, facilities master plans. Why do we need those kind of things? Because we're not limited to what we're doing now. That's why. We're limited somewhat by finances and revenues. But we should not be limited. Don't limit yourself in your respective areas, in your civic organizations, in your churches, in your professional activities throughout the state, in your class. Don't limit yourself among peers. Don't limit yourself to the way we've always done things around here, as Dale and Kennedy might say, to the existing culture. We've got a great culture. Let's preserve it and further strengthen it. And you are the right people to help do that. But think beyond. Think about, and this is what you want to instill in our students, of course. Think beyond what they know. For instance, have to throw this in, flight training program. What's that all about? I mean, somebody said nursing program years ago. And it's about opportunity. It's about expanding your opportunities and your vision. Thinking, I hate to say this on tape, but thinking out of the box. Being creative. Goes back to creativity. There's always going to be risks there. There will be those, and there are currently those who don't feel we should be doing those kind of things. Because why isn't what we've been doing good enough? Well, it's great. We've done great work. But we can do more. We can do more to serve our communities, more to transform families, students and their families for generations. But that takes at least some thinking about how to become a transformational leader. And what can you do every day and during the year to think a bit more transformationally and to allow yourself to go beyond the status quo and that comfort zone? Because being a transactional leader and accepting how we've done things, the culture, is there's a comfort zone in that, and there's little risk. The risk is you're not achieving the greatness that you could achieve for the students, for our communities. So with that, I hope I've left you with a few things to at least consider. We've got a powerful culture here, a powerful college. Small rural colleges can do great things, and you all are the litmus test of that, and our students are the litmus test of that. You're going to have great careers, and you're going to go on to be very proud of your time at Ozarka College, both as faculty, staff, administrators, and most importantly, our students. So. With that, I thank you very much. I hope it's been worth your time. I don't know if I've already had one cookie, so I don't need another. Thank you. I won't be ingracious and say you shouldn't do that, but thank you. I appreciate that. Heavy.
We want to thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
You did. I did. And this is from Ozarka College, and appreciation for your service, not only to this college, but to our community and our nation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you all very much. Thanks.